Not all serial killers hide in the dark. In the glitz and glamour of the Gold Coast, Eddie is overworked, heartbroken, and about to take the trip of a lifetime with two of his best friends. They've got an old bus, a sense of adventure, and want him to jump on board for a journey down the East Coast and into the barren deserts of the outback. What he doesn't know is that he will be drawn into a world of violence, murder and mayhem, and become witness to possibly the darkest day in Australia's criminal history. Somewhere within the sun-drenched chaos, he may even rediscover love. Dust and Devils, a journey into the dark heart of Australia, where survival means bending the rules of friendship and where the line between good and evil is blown away with a stinging blood-soaked dust. Broken hearts, rebel bikers, open roads and serial killers. Strap yourself in and come for the ride with those who dance with the Dust and Devils. Dust and Devils, a novel by author Darren Kasenkow. Learn more at australianbooklovers.com.
Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A big warm welcome to everyone, all of our listeners, and a huge thank you for joining us at the Australian Book Lovers podcast. Our mission is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature that spans a whole range of genres to book lovers around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I'm Veronica Strachan, fantasy, memoir and picture book writer, voracious reader, and one of your co-founders and hosts for the podcast today, coming to you from Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung country in Victoria.
And I am Darren Kasenkow, science fiction and horror author and reader, of course. I can't always add that in. And your co-host and also co-founder of the Australian Book Lovers website and podcast. And coming to you today from Corner Country on, well, for me, which is a very exciting episode, not only episode 24, which is also one of my quote-unquote lucky numbers, and based on the very scientific
you have a lot of those.
and metaphysical principle that's the day of my birthday. So
well, there you go.
Yes. And so not just that, though it's not my birthday today, but 24 is. It's also a fantastic little horror edition with a really cool interview coming ahead. So yes, very happy to reach number 24.
Yeah, from one of Australia's most prominent horror writers, and Alan Baxter not only is a writer, but he contributes to the Australian writing community in a whole lot of ways. So that is a great interview.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it was super fun. So we'll be getting to that. Yeah. But yes, episode 24, how about we jump straight into some news? Because I've got some cool stuff to do, and I'm sure you do as well.
Absolutely. Itching to get it out there. Go, go, go. Okay, so here is a little news from the Australian Society of Authors, and we chatted with their CEO, Olivia Lanchester, and you'll hear that interview in a few episodes. But it's just a really good organisation for writers to be a part of, because they are all about advocacy, support and advice for writers and illustrators. And I thought it was interesting, just based on some discussion that you had with Alan, and as I mentioned, he is one of our more prolific authors, and he does a great deal in the writing community. But he also has, he diversifies, so he's a teacher and he does a lot of other things as well. So I just thought I'd share that the ASA did a survey on author earnings in Australia in November of 2020, and some of the people know that there are not many authors in Australia who can support themselves with full-time writing, despite the fact that, a lot of people do write full-time. And it's pretty challenging that of the respondents, and they had about 1,400 in their survey, and the perilously low state of author earnings is the way it's described on the ASA website, because of all of those respondents, about 80% are earning less than $15,000 per year. And about half of them earn between $0 and $2,000. So that's not a whole lot for the hours and hours and hours that writers spend and illustrators putting their creative works out in the world. And of the full-time writers, 53.6% indicate they earn on average less than $15,000, with 23% of them, again, in that $0 to $1,999. So a lot of that was, of course, exacerbated by COVID, but I thought it was interesting for people to be aware, when they see books coming out and, prices going up and all those kind of things happening, to be aware that the authors don't get all of that. Your book purchase is supporting a whole lot of people in the publishing industry. But yeah, that's a bit of a worry, isn't it? And the reason why so many authors do other things as well, such as you and I, which we do other things as well.
Yes. And look, worry is one word, I suppose, but I think I like to think of it as a transition because, the digital realm, as far as digital publishing, it's been around for a bit, but it still takes a while to really find its feet. And, to become a the irony and the difficulty, I think, is if your goal, which, my goal is, a lot of our listeners' goal might be to become a full-time writer. If you want to be independent, somehow you have to be able to fit two full-times in, really, when you think about it. You need to be a full-time writer and a full-time marketer, because one without the other is kind of like having a car with two wheels. It's the engine's going to sound great, it's going to look great, but it's not going to get anywhere unless you get those other two tyres on or wheels on. And I think, that's something that's evolving too, the spread of knowledge when it comes to marketing, and obviously people's the barriers are breaking down now, where people are more willing, I think, to buy any sort of book as long as it's a story that's going to grab their particular attention at the time, as opposed to, that looks like an independent, whereas that may have been a barrier before, but that's slowly breaking down as well. So yes, it is a little bit not disheartening, but a little sad that our awesome writers out there aren't raking in the big bucks just yet. But at the same time, I think that's something that'll change. I'd like to think that it's something that's going to change. Yeah. And on the bright side of the coin, still thousands more dollars than what most musicians are getting out there. Speaking from someone who's left a lot of blood, sweat and tears on stages over the years. And again, it's, that's why, in the music industry, it's so good if you can find yourself with a manager or someone who can take care of all those important things like marketing and promoting and just generally organising those things that are going to get you an income stream. But yes, I think we're all adapting, we're all learning, and I think that'll slowly change, definitely.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, Evie, for that little groan of contentment over by the window. There's one of the dogs. All right. So the challenges of a home office. So that segue then led me to thinking about the opportunities for people to get free books, but still to be supporting writers. So, one of the ways is to look for advanced reader copies. And this is where publishers or the authors will send out a limited number of their book that they're about to launch in the hope that they will be getting some reviews. Number one, which always helps people go, oh, somebody else read it and they thought of that. Okay, yep, that's me. That will often help me buy a book. But also so that they will share it with their own followers. So book bloggers will often be a part of that distribution network. And it's a bit like pre-marketing, when you get a film and you can go along to a premiere and then you can spread the word and make sure on social media that you say, oh, I saw such and such. So it's a part of the marketing process. So even though you're getting it for free, it gives you an opportunity to read it. And by giving them a review or sharing what you thought of it, again, always an honest review is the best bet. And no guarantee, you're not obliged, although some of the websites ask you to do that. But yeah, this is another way that you can support readers. So book bloggers will generally be people who write about books a lot. They might do reviews a lot, and they might have a platform such as a website, or they might use Instagram, or they might use one of the other social media platforms. But you can also apply to some of the publishers to be on their distribution list, and you need to write them, of course, an appropriate letter and tell them how many followers you've got, or where your interests lie, because don't go on to a Harlequin, like a romance publisher, if you love speculative fiction, for example. So make sure that you're telling them about your love and about your followers and who you interact with, so that you can do that. And if you're not a blogger, some of the Australian publishers use NetGalley. So Penguin, Momentum Books, HarperCollins, Harlequin, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Hachette Children's, Random House Bloomsbury, they use NetGalley. NetGalley is, you can go on and be one of their members. And again, they'd like to have somebody who reviews a lot of books, who's got a little bit of a following that people will check out and see what you do. But you can, jump on and just get a start there. And you can ask to be on the distribution list. There's no guarantee, because it's no good sending it out to everybody. You want it to send it to people who are going to read and review and provide a review. So you can join something like NetGalley. There's another one called Booksprout. You can jump on and get an ARC, and authors can put their ARCs on there as well. So if you do a lot of reading and you're finding it a bit expensive, and you think, I really like some new books that maybe haven't made it to the library yet, then think about jumping onto something like NetGalley or Booksprout, and maybe even to sharing your reviews of books. We would love to have your reviews, and you can do a little audio, a book link, and send it in to us, and we'll share that. Or you can share it on your social media, or amongst your friends, or at a book club, or something like that. So all of those things are great supports.
Yes, and it's so important too, because there's a lot of power in the reader's hands to...
Yes, as we spoke about last time, about readers, particularly on Goodreads, writing reviews, about them being an important part of the publishing process.
And especially because of, if there's a paperback, like if someone prefers paperback and they purchase a book and they think it's fantastic, most of the time they're going to lend that book to their friends, which is fantastic. But then, potentially that sales missed out for the author, but at the same time, that author is gaining readership. So the next book comes out, they may want to grab it. So that's the way it's always worked. But when it comes to digital, for example, now with, programs such as, say, for example, Kindle Unlimited, where one can download as many books as they like from a particular library, free of charge. That's fantastic. And but if you read a great book, then it's always good to just let your friends know about it, or send a link, send a share button or something, because, even if the book's for free, or you're getting it for free, but you really enjoy a read, let other people know, because there's nothing more powerful than a reader, or should I say a writer, my apologies, that can see how many people, the number growing of people that are reading his or her works, or their work.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there is another way. What you can do is subscribe to the Australian Book Lovers newsletter, which you can go to the contact page or any of the pages on our website. And then you can be in the running for when our generous authors are doing giveaways. For example, at the moment, we've got Avril Drummond, whose interview is coming up in a few episodes. She's given us 2 paperback copies of her book, Gloam, which is a tale of romantic love, family, loss, and hard decisions. And all you have to do is be a subscriber, and then you just let us know, why do you think we need to pay more attention to the state of our planet? And you can go in the draw for winning a copy of Gloam. So our authors are really happy to give away some of their fabulous work.
And good fun for everyone out there. Why not jump on and subscribe and let us know, and put yourself in the running to win a book.
That's right. And make me do more newsletters. When I start, I think, it's really good. We've got this to talk about and this to talk about. So yes, do that. Jump on and subscribe. All right. That'll be enough news for today. What have you got for us? Have you got some fabulous spotlights? I
do indeed. I've got a few books I wanted to spotlight, and a bit of a interesting article premise that I'd like to chat about in news this episode. So first of all, yes, absolutely. Would love to let our listeners out there know a little bit about some of the books that are listed on the Australian Book Lovers website. And look, we are talking to Alan Baxter today, and we are probably going to be talking a little bit about horror, as one could probably assume. No points for being a pro. What do they call it? What do you see? Someone who sees the future.
Prognosticator?
No,
No, that's not the word you're thinking of. A seer? No.
Seer, maybe. I'm not too sure. I was thinking like a prophetic, or anyway.
A prophet. A prophet. Yes.
Maybe a prophet. Yeah. No points being a prophet if you picked horror as part of a discussion here. But nonetheless, I'd like to we'll start with a couple of books from Alan Baxter, at the risk of maybe if I would highlight them before, but they're a good opportunity to refresh everybody's knowledge of what he writes and some of the cool stories. So just a couple of his books. So one is called Served Cold, and again by Alan Baxter. And of course, you'll find that under our horror genre. And the description opens up with a quote, and that is, "At turns creepy and visceral, Baxter delivers the horror goods." And that quote is from Paul Tremblay, author of A Head Full of Ghosts and The Cabin at the End of the World. And I have heard that A Head Full of Ghosts is absolutely riveting horror. I haven't had the chance to read that yet, but nonetheless. So, collected together for the first time ever, these 16 provocative and intensely chilling tales by multi-award-winning author Alan Baxter venture into the depths of the darkest and most shadowy places, where unspeakable horrors are the predators and we the willing prey. Prepare for an always terrifying, frequently heartbreaking journey in multiple stages, each piece echoing Baxter's unique voice that effortlessly blends horror, fantasy, and the weird, cementing his place as a modern master of the dark fantastique and resulting in an unforgettable volume of fiction. So yes, that sounds very cool. Served Cold, 16 tales. So that's a talk about bang for your buck when you're grabbing that copy. And the second title by Alan Baxter I wanted to just give a brief little spotlight on is Hidden City. And Hidden City is described as, when the city is sick, everyone suffers. Stephen Hines listened to the city and the city spoke. Cleverport told him she was sick. With his unnatural connection to her, that meant Hines was sick too. But when his friend, Detective Abby Jones, comes to him for help investigating a series of deaths with no discernible cause, Hines can't say no. Then strange fungal growths begin to appear in the streets, affecting anyone who gets too close, turning them into violent lunatics. As the mayhem escalates and officials start to seal Cleverport off from the rest of the world, Hines knows the trouble has only just begun. Oh, very creepy, with a little bit of fungus coming up through the streets and turning everyone crazy. A guaranteed good time there.
Guaranteed good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the next title I'd like to have a brief spotlight is If Only Tonight We Could Sleep, which is by Matthew R. Davis, a fellow horror writer that we've had on our show previously. Now, the synopsis for If Only Tonight We Could Sleep, which of course found under the horror genre, reads as follows. All lives are haunted by love and loss, by hunger and hurt, by desperation and death. And those depicted in the debut collection of dark short stories from Matthew R. Davis are no exception. Here, horror can be found dancing the Morrison Rockin' the Sunset Strip, grooving under nightclub lights and unspooling from a homemade mixtape. It's waiting in the dim glow of a stranger's living room and the bleeding sunset over a deserted beach, lurking beneath the family Christmas tree and the streets of the city itself. It's spray-painted on dirty walls, echoing in hollow hearts and abandoned homes. It's everywhere. If Only Tonight We Could Sleep collects 13 heartfelt and haunting horror tales by Australian author Matthew R. Davis, including the Australian Shadows Awards recognised This Impossible Gift and The Heart of the Mission, each illustrated with darkly beautiful images by Red Wallflower Photography. And that was If Only Tonight We Could Sleep by Matthew R. Davis.
Very good.
Now I'm going to throw a short one in by a really upside down author called Darren Kasenkow. And the title is called See the City Red, which you'll also find in horror.
Yes.
And this synopsis reads as, when the Antichrist comes to town, bad things can happen. In a bustling metropolis verging on the edge of chaos, all Peter Gold wants is the chance for a simple life with his wife and young daughter in the safety of their apartment. When two strangers appear at the door one evening, however, his world is thrown into turmoil when a sudden act of sickening violence destroys everything he has ever loved. See the City Red is a no-holds-barred dystopian horror thriller that is as relentless as it is thought-provoking and is certainly not for the faint of heart. and that is See the City Red. Yes, by
Which
me.
by Darren Kasenkow,
Yes.
which I have read, and I did really enjoy it. Some of it was pretty horrible, as in terms of horror, but it is a different. There's more than the horror. That's the vehicle, I guess, for a great story.
Yeah, probably slips more
Yeah.
into dystopian, but
Yeah.
with horror elements, yes.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to finish up with something a little bit different. And that's a thriller, a bit of a mystery thriller. And this title is called Arcadia Waters by Richard Connery. And you can find that under our mystery and thrillers genre. So the description for Arcadia Waters reads as: a cry for help. A cross-country dash pilots Mason and his trusted canine Marley to Airlie Beach and the tropical coast of the Whitsunday Islands, North Queensland, Australia, where the hunt for a psychopathic serial killer begins. Mason soon discovers a spate of horrific crimes linking back to a past he had tried so desperately hard to forget. A traumatic loss, a tragedy that would impact the remainder of his adult life. And that is Arcadia Waters by Richard Connery, which you can find under our mystery and thrillers genre.
Well, see, now I'm going to feel a bit cranky about that because Airlie Beach, the Whitsunday Islands, beautiful, relaxing. I've been there. And now there's a psychopathic serial killer out there. It's like, oh, Richard, what were you thinking?
Yes, well, we've got another title. Forgive me, I don't have the name off the top of my head, but that involves a murder mystery. In fact, I think it's a series of 3 books through Wild Dingo Press that's set in Cairns. So having spent a lot of time through the Whitsundays and Cairns and Townsville, yes, it's why not throw a serial killer up there? I mean, my book, Dust and Devils, which that opens up with a killing in Queensland.
Yeah,
well,
helpful, very helpful people. So, we don't have that many murders here. Anyway, so
sunny Queensland, get the postcard, get the murder.
All right, I'm going to throw in a joke before you finish that, just to cheer us up there. What do you get when a lamington dresses up for a big night out?
Oh, you got me. I have no idea.
A glamington, of course.
Oh, my lordy.
So, no, that's just from, Booktopia. So I, as Australian Book Lovers on Twitter, which is our handle there is at Australian Books, I follow a whole lot of Australian publishers, and the Booktopian put that one out for Catherine Savvis's beloved irreverent baking Bible, Bake Australia Great. So I thought I might have a bit of a look at that. But they've got a fantastic photo of a 3-tiered pink lamington cake stuffed with strawberries and cream. So, yeah, I thought that was a nice cheery one for us. Okay, go on with your news.
Actually, that may illuminate just a little bit of your psychology, Veronica, in the sense of we're talking about murder in the tropics, so that's blood and blue water, and then you found yourself streaming, or your conscious streaming into a lamington, which is like when you bite into it, it looks like a bit of blood on the inside. And I only say that
only for a horror writer.
Well, because that actually works out a beautiful segue into what I'd just like to have a real quick chat and just read you a little bit. I stumbled upon an article or I guess a research paper, and the title is called "The Impact of Psychology on Horror Literature," and that's by a gentleman by the name of Preston Davies. Or Davis, depending. And so I'll just read a little bit out because I thought it was quite interesting. It's just very interesting. It's about 20-something pages, so you can definitely just search for that, and that's called The Impact of Psychology on Horror Literature. So, fear is an inherent part of the human experience. It is designed to keep us safe. It was fears like acrophobia, arachnophobia, and hydrophobia that kept our primitive ancestors alive for centuries. But, in more recent times, humans have adapted fear into a form of entertainment. During the late 20th century, authors adapted our fear into a new genre of horror novels focused on serial killers and the fear of the unknown. Why is it that humans have grown to like being afraid? Dr. Christopher Dwyer explains there are 5 reasons why modern entertainment allows us to enjoy being scared. The first and most important reason why we are able to enjoy being afraid is the safety net that books and movies provide. Fear is a natural response to danger, but knowing that we aren't in any real danger allows us to experience the benefits of fear without going into the fight or flight mode that we normally experience under pressure. There are many benefits of being scared in the short term. The most tangible benefit is the release of chemicals in the brain that cause pleasure. The rush people describe while watching a scary movie or reading a suspenseful story is the result of a release of endorphins and dopamine. This hormone and neurotransmitter creates a drug-like state of euphoria when it is released. The same chemical that makes us like certain foods also makes us enjoy being scared. There is also enjoyment found in the satisfaction of finishing a horror novel or movie. Dr. Dwyer reported watching The Shining without looking away and thus feeling an immense amount or sense of pride. Another emotional response is one of a bond between people. In horror movies, people watching a film together often feel closer through their own fear. And the author says, I have found that this same bond can be formed between a character in a novel and the reader. In Thomas Harris's The Silence of the Lambs, the reader is able to feel the same fear that young FBI trainee Clarice Starling feels when first encountering the cannibal Hannibal Lecter. Through this, one is able to emphasize with the characters of the book. The final reason, however, that we enjoy being scared is particularly important, and it inspired the creation of this thesis paper. Sigmund Freud's death instinct, known as Thanatos, provides some psychoanalytic insight into why horror creates pleasure and, in my experience, curiosity. Freud believed that, as death is a part of life, people are naturally infatuated with death. He asserted that this is why many people are fascinated with dark or evil things. So I thought that was quite interesting. And that is an excerpt from the paper called, so I'll go back to it, an excerpt from the paper called The Impact of Psychology on Horror Literature by Preston Davis or Davies, depending on how you'd like to pronounce that. So yes, I think I quite agree with a lot of the sentiments there in the sense of the idea of being able to explore fear in a safe environment really is what I would, I don't want to see a serial killer in real life at all. But perhaps that is, consciously or unconsciously, perhaps that's what draws someone like myself to horror in the sense of, it's just one way of not making sense of the world, but dealing with elements of that I know exist in the world that I hope I never have to come across. But also it's a kind of a reminder as well that it's out there. So there you go.
There you go.
So where lamingtons fit into the psychology of horror?
Well,
I suspect they just
the
might.
same satisfaction as eating. There was something in that article that you mentioned. So but
yes. So horror is my lamington.
And distraction. That was my distraction, Darren.
And that is my news for this episode. So
very good, very good. And can I just say that this recipe looks absolutely fantastic because they put a dark chocolate ganache in it. Oh, anyway, I'm just getting sidetracked now. I'll stop looking at the photo of this beautiful Glamington cake from Catherine Sabbath's Irreverent Baking Bible, Bake Australia Great. So anyway, all good. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your interview with Alan, or give us the lowdown. I think you do his bio when you start talking to him.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Tell us a little bit about.
Well, what an honour it was to be able to talk with Alan, or Mr. Alan Baxter. It was just such a fantastic opportunity, and definitely no shortage of subjects to talk about. Obviously, he is a writer that is well ahead of the curve, well ahead of the game in the sense of, his output, his understanding of the craft, his mastery of the craft, his passion for all things writing and all things horror. And he's very, unique, but he's very established ability to draw all different threads from, what is it? He's obviously living a very interesting life and weaving that through his tales of horror, and as well as he's got his detective style stories as well, which he'll chat a little bit more. It was also really awesome to have a chat with him because of the fact that he is working with another author, and I think he said he's done 8 novels now. And of course, we've just begun our journey of writing together as far as on novels. So it was really such a great opportunity to chat with him about that as well. And of course, he's a kung fu man, so we had some great fun talking about fighting and kung fu as well. So look, I think even for all of our listeners out there, you're going to have a ball with having a listen to Alan talk. It's not just all about horror, it's about so many things. And one of the important things that he did bring up, which is the last thing you'd expect to hear talking to a horror writer, is the importance of looking after your body and moving, giving yourself time to move if you are spending a lot of time writing. And as in, just the physical importance of getting up, getting that blood flow going, treat your body to some stretching and exercise, and so that it can be, that well-fueled and well-oiled machine that obviously will allow your brain to work better while you write. So that was really, I think it was good to have that point driven home. I'm very guilty of it. I can spend sometimes 8-10 hours at my desk, not just writing, sometimes working on the website or whatever it might be, research. And I have to remind myself to get up and to hear, which you'll hear Alan talk about, how he a lot of times uses a timer.
Yeah,
it's really good,
yeah,
and that's something else.
method.
Yeah, and that's something else that I think will make an impression on the listeners, and that is the sense of discipline that Alan carries with himself and in his life, and that's such an important element as well.
All right, let's have a listen.
Yes, absolutely. Without further ado, here is the fantastic, the horrifically awesome, and horror-dripping, wonderful gentleman, Alan Baxter. Okay, dear listeners, we have a very special guest for the podcast today, and we have a British Australian author who is described as a word warlock, a martial artist, a whiskey-soaked swear monkey, a dog lover, and a cynical optimist. Now, this gentleman writes horror, supernatural thrillers, and dark fantasy, liberally mixed with crime and noir. He rides a motorcycle and loves his dog. And of all things, he also teaches Kung Fu. Now, our guest has written many much-loved novellas, and has had more than 80 short stories published all around the world, with his works translated into French, Spanish, German, and Japanese. He has won an abundance of awards, so numerous you definitely have to visit his website to have a look, because it's incredible. And if that's not enough, he's also the Vice President of the Australasian Horror Writers Association. He has been so kind enough as to list some of his titles on our Australian Book Lovers website, and those titles include The Rue, The Gulp, which is 5 tales of horror, Devouring Dark, a supernatural thriller with elements of crime and horror, Hidden City, and Served Cold, a collection of 16 tales. Considered a master of horror and exceptionally prolific in just about every aspect of writing, Alan Baxter, it is a very exciting opportunity to chat with you, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm embarrassed by that introduction. Goodness, I sound really busy.
I'm very honoured to have you on and to be able to put that introduction together, because you're absolutely very prolific and you've achieved so much in your career, which I'm really looking forward to chatting about. But I guess the very first question for you, though, is, how has 2021 been for you so far?
Better than 2020. That's the start.
Excellent. That's the first good response we'd like to hear.
Yeah, to be honest, it's been okay. There's been a few different things going on, and I mainly was concentrating on the release of The Gulp, which came out in January, and then sort of the follow-up sort of promo and everything that went on with that. So that's taken a lot of my focus. And I've just been working on the next Sam Aston book with David Wood, and we're just releasing that now. So yeah, the start of this year's been sort of quite busy, but I haven't had to also do classes through Zoom and homeschool my son and stuff like that. So it's been a bit of an easier pace this year.
Oh, excellent. That's good to hear. And sounds like writing-wise, you're already straight out of the gates with a couple of winners. So The Gulp obviously haven't just been released. And you mentioned you're working in collaboration with another author.
Yeah.
I guess I'll let that be a segue straight into a question I have. I myself have done that once with, of all people, Veronica Strachan, who is the co-host of the Australian Book Lovers podcast and my business partner. But we actually did work on a book together, which we're in the process of vetting at the moment. It's first of a series. How do you find the art of writing with somebody else? Do you find that you approach your style in a completely different way? I know that I found my writing a little bit different working with Veronica, because I would have to try and emulate her character, the character that she developed voice. And it was also interesting to read her take on my character when she was, bringing, animating or voicing my character. So I'm wondering, how did your writing pivot or adjust to working with another writer?
Well, it's an interesting process, to be honest. In the one case, like, you can't be too sort of special about it. With my own writing, the stuff that just comes out under my own name, I'm a lot more sort of self-critical, I suppose, and because I don't have someone else's input into it until it gets right through sort of to the finished and editing stage. But David Wood and I have written 8 novels together now.
Oh, far out.
Yeah, so we're getting our routine down.
Oh, I'm guessing you might have, yes.
Yeah, so I mean the sort of the system that we've got in place now is that we've got 2 main series that run, which is the Jake Crowley Adventures and the Sam Aston Investigations. And the Jake Crowley Adventures are sort of occult thrillers, kind of a Dan Brown, Secret Room, Secret Society, occult thriller type books. And the Sam Aston Adventures investigations are more like sort of monster thrillers and that sort of horror thriller crossover. So it's the 3rd one of the Sam Astons that we've just dropped, Crocalypse it's called. And the thing is that when we're planning to write, we'll sit down and we'll spend ages talking and planning, and we have loads of Skype conversations and all that sort of stuff. And the system that we've got in place now is that we'll get to a point where we're sort of happy with what we want to do. And then Dave will sit down and write a detailed chapter by chapter outline, because he's really good at plotting and structure. Then he'll send that over to me and I'll write the entire first draft. And then we bounce that back and forth a few times and sort of smooth out the voice and the character and all those sorts of things after that. So we've got a method going now that sort of works quite well because, you know, we sort of established Dave's really good at the plotting and the structure. I'm a bit better at the sort of the prose and the character stuff. And so it sort of works out well then when we mix it that way.
That's really interesting. So it's not a case of you might do a few chapters, Dave might do a few chapters. It's the other way around.
The first time, the first book, we did that. We literally wrote a chapter, sent it back, and went chapter by chapter, which was okay, but it was a bit clunky doing it that way. When we decided to do the next book, we decided to try it this way, and it took a few sort of tries to sort of smooth out the process. But now we've got it down, and we try to release 1 book a year at least that we work on collaboratively. So there'll usually be 1 Jake Crowley or 1 Sam Aston book each year that comes out. And we were planning for Crocalypse to come out later this year, but as it turned out, it came together well, and we just decided to surprise fans with it, and it's Adrenaline Press have just dropped it early, so that's quite exciting. So I wasn't expecting to have a book out so soon, but the Gulp came out in January, and we've just managed to squeeze this one out at the end of March. So it kind of hit the year running, really.
Yeah, definitely. And when you are working on one of the collaborative editions or novels, is that a priority in your writing schedule, or is that something that you work at around other works that you're doing under your own pen name, or your own name, should I say, not pen name, but
yeah.
So
well, we sort of schedule it in like that. I mean, it's an important part sort of each year's writing schedule. I try to make sure that I get at least 1 book under my own name and 1 book with Dave out each year, if possible, you know, and publishers allowing and everything else. But that's the sort of plan. So normally when we're in the stage of talking about the next book, we'll start chatting about the ideas and the story and what we're going to do with it months before we start the book. And we'll knock those ideas around for a while. In the meantime, I'll be working on whatever project I'm working on. And then once we've figured out that we've got the right ideas and we know where we want to go with the story, Dave will schedule in writing that sort of chapter by chapter outline, and he'll give me an idea of, you know, when he reckons he'll have that finished by, and so then I'll block out a period of time, 2 or 3 months after that, to then sit down and write that first draft. So it's usually set in the schedule, you know, 4 or 6 months ahead. So sort of plan that way, and then projects can kind of overlap. So I'll finish what I'm doing, then I'll write the thing with Dave, and when I send it back to him, I'll move on to the next thing that I'm doing, and it's constantly kind of leapfrogging projects that way.
Yeah, sounds like a really well-oiled machine, and that's a really interesting approach. Definitely,
we've kind of got it down now. It sort of works nicely, and we work well together, and the books do well. So it's good for all of us, and if we keep disciplined with it, it works well.
Yeah, and of course, discipline is the key to any facet of writing, really, isn't it? But I'm just wondering, in the early days or even now, do you ever get like frantic midnight calls and I've just got this brilliant idea for, you know, chapter 3, change it, or is it something that once the plot or the essential, you know, the draft of the outline is down, does it go through many changes from David's end? Like, does he come up with some ideas mid-writing?
I mean, we normally kind of nail those things in these long conversations before we start. But then when Dave then sends me that detailed outline, there might be a few things that we sort of hadn't talked about or hadn't planned, and he'll have a little note in there going, "Hey, I thought this was cool," because once you start writing in more detail, the story reveals itself a bit more.
Absolutely.
More often than not, I'm down with those ideas. It's rare that I will disagree, or if I do see a bit of an issue with it, I might say, "Well, yeah, but." And then in the process of writing the first draft, sometimes it's the same. I'll be going along with it, and his notes will say one thing, and I'll be like, "Oh, this is a better idea." So I tend to just write the better idea and then say to Dave, "So I did this." Then do a few things after. If it's going to be something that would be a significant structural change, obviously we'd have to stop and talk about it. But that doesn't tend to happen because we have such big conversations before it all kicks off. So
yeah, and obviously you understand each other's approach. So
yeah,
no doubt you almost read each other's thoughts when it comes to the story anyway.
Yeah, it kind of goes like that. And because we've got 4 Crowley books and 3 Aston books out now, the characters and the sort of style of the book and everything is kind of well established. So we both sort of know it's not a formula exactly, but we both know the shape of how things work. So it's easy to stay inside the lane.
Excellent. So definitely comfortable. Now, it's an understatement, Alan, to say that you have a lot of amazing work out there all across the world. And so when it comes to horror, though, I was wondering, through all that work out there, is there an element or a theme that you haven't yet had the chance to play with or to explore? And if so, do you have an idea of what your next path of exploration will be as you move to new writing?
I don't know, really. I mean, it's a good question. A lot of the time for me, theme tends to reveal itself in the process of the writing. A lot of the time, I'll write stories where I have good ideas for sort of characters and plot sort of ideas. And in the process of the writing, I see the theme sort of emerge, like Devouring Dark, very much sort of a meditation on death and dying and the justice and injustice of death and stuff like that. Hidden City is very much looking at the consequences of like unhealthy relationships and things like that. So, but I never sort of approached those things with a view to writing about those things. I was writing the stories that turned out to be about those things.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so sometimes with short stories, it might be a little bit more clear what I'm doing. But more often than not, I'll know somehow that I have the seed of stuff that's working in terms of, story and character and whatever else. And then it'll be a case of writing it and exploring themes as I go. And so often long before the end, I'll sort of figure out what I'm doing. But sometimes I get to the end of a book and it's on redrafting it that I sort of go, "Oh, right, that's what this is about." Because for me, character and story always comes first. And once you do then discover the theme, it's good then in the second draft, you can you smooth that out. You draw up the elements that are right and you drop, you can smooth out elements that are a bit heavy-handed or whatever. But I often don't write with particular theme in mind. For me, it's always story and character come first.
Okay. And when it comes to characters, I guess it's a bit of a loaded question, but do you base it on, people that you've met throughout your life, or are you the type of writer that will essentially take little bits and pieces but create somebody from scratch?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I've never written a character that is based on a person, but I've written characters that are sort of constructed from elements of multiple people, definitely. I mean, to some degree, all characters are at least slightly autobiographical. You kind of have to put your own mind into them to subsequently develop them. Obviously, the horrible, evil villains of the piece are not especially autobiographical, I hope, but...
and they're usually the most fun to write, aren't they?
Well, that's right, yeah. And you kind of have to put your mind in theirs in order to write them and figure out, well, if I was this guy, what would I do for that authenticity? So, I've had to go for long walks on the beach sometimes after writing certain scenes because I've lived in this horrible head for a while to write things. But yeah, I mean, I just cannot help observing characters. We were out for dinner the other day and I was sitting there and I suddenly grabbed my phone, quickly jotted down a note in my notes app, and my wife just looked at me and goes, "So who was that then?" because she knows that I'd just been sitting there and I'd seen something or overheard something, and it was a guy at a table a couple away from us that just made me, I was like, I've got to remember that. So I tend to jot these things down. So there's a couple of elements about that guy that will find their way into a character at some point, and so I just can't, everything is someone to some degree or elements of someone, but no character is based on a person. I've never done that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's one of the beautiful things about being a writer, isn't it? Because even just the trip to the shop to grab a loaf of bread or whatever is at the same time research, whether it's a conscious decision or not, because there's always something in the day that might be inspiring or something that may, and if it's not directly inspiring in the sense of giving you an idea, it may tweak something that you're already working on in your head or
everything is fuel, everything you see.
That's right. Yeah,
you see, every experience, it all sort of pours into the machine and it comes out one way or another, sometimes kind of almost verbatim and other times really corrupted, but you just, something triggers this little idea that develops into something that develops. I've said many times that I think the only real difference between writers and non-writers is that we all see all the same stuff. It's just that writers remember it and recycle it.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And and thankfully the world's that crazy. We're never going to run out of interesting observations and inspirations out there.
No, it's endlessly fascinating.
Absolutely. Now, reading through a lot of your achievements and all the releases that you've put out. For me, prior to this interview, it's been a bit of it hasn't been a bit. It's been a real inspiration because I've spent a lot of my time over the last couple of years working on full feature novels, and reading through all your work, I realised I may have neglected the art and I guess the joy and freedoms that come and the lessons that can come by bringing to life short stories. And it's definitely something that I'm going to pivot and change in my approach to writing. A very conscious decision, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's like really sparked this sudden craving to get back to short story writing. But my question is, you've obviously got a dedication to short stories, so as well as feature novels. I'm wondering, was it an early decision in your career to have that balance and have both of those features, a prominent, signature of your career, or is it just that your love of writing means you've got an imagination that won't switch off, so you're always writing either big or small, no matter what?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, I've always loved short stories. I discovered Roald Dahl's short stories for adults when I was much too young, and they, corrupted my young mind. But I never. Originally, when I first started writing seriously, I didn't really think about writing short stories. I'd always loved them, but I'd never really thought that I would write them. I started with novels, but then a few people saying to me that, a good way to promote your work and to get your name out there and to get people interested in your longer work is to develop a bit of a name with short stories. You should write short stories set in the world of your novels and blah, 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 usual sort of marketing stuff, which when I was a baby writer, that was sort of new to me as an idea. But I thought, that's not a bad idea. I should do that. Thinking, I've written novels, that's a piece of piss, no worries, I'll write short stories. And quickly came to realise just how difficult it is to write good short stories.
Completely different animal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very similar but also very different art form. They're the same as a novel in as much as they need to have a beginning, a middle and an end, they need conflict, they need good characters and blah, blah, all that. But that's where the similarity sort of ends. They're very different things. But then it became, in the process of sort of learning that and going, I want to get better at this, I developed a real love for writing short fiction as well as, like I said, I'd always been a fan of reading. And I really enjoy getting my teeth down into a novel and writing a great big story. But I love the experience of short stories and novellas as well that sort of land in the middle there, especially for genre fiction, especially for horror. Short stories and novella is a fantastic length to develop that sort of genre fiction idea. That novel length things tend to grow a bit bigger, and it's a bit difficult to maintain certain aspects of genre through the length of a novel. It's just a different beast. But I've just got to the point where I just love short fiction so much that I just keep writing it. And a lot of the time, I mentioned Devouring Dark earlier on. That's a novel that came about because of a short story, because I wrote a short story called Shadows of the Lonely Dead. and it was a very popular story. It was produced in an anthology. It won an award. It got in a best of. It got translated. And then I sort of figured, this is a good story. I've explored it a bit here, but there's a lot more to come from this. So I subsequently wrote Devouring Dark, which is essentially a sequel to that short story. And the publisher put the story in the back of the novel in the end. So, these things are can all sort of be interconnected. With The Gulf, it's 5 short novellas, around 20,000 words each. Each one is a standalone story, but they all take place in the same place, and there's characters that cross over, and across the arc of all 5 stories, there's a bigger story being told. So you just get to play with so many different things when you work in different lengths. And I just have the ideas and the passion to just write everything in my head. So I just keep doing it.
And not only that, I think short stories are a great way to bounce ideas across your readers and see which one. There may be a story amongst it that really resonates and may prompt further action and like I said, maybe even work into a feature length or so. Rather than spend all that time on a novel and then wait for the feedback, it's a good way to A, get feedback on the style of writing, and B, obviously the tale that you've told.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there is also the sort of the bloody-mindedness that if I decide there's a novel and a novel length idea, it's like, well, I'm going to write it anyway and hope it finds an audience.
Oh yeah, of course.
But that's, that's just a general bloody-mindedness of being an author, I suppose. But yeah, it is really interesting to watch the way people respond to short stories. My second short story collection is called Serve Cold, and
that's 16 tales, isn't it?
Yeah, there's 16 stories in there, and 3 of them are original stories that hadn't been published anywhere else. It was the same with my first collection, Crochet, and that's 19 stories. And again, 3 of them had never been published before, because I like to make sure that people that might have read more of my work than others, if they're going to buy a collection, there's at least a sort of chunk of stuff in there that's brand new for everyone. And with Serve Cold, there was one of those 3 original stories that I was really sort of on the fence about whether or not to put in. And I was like, I'm not sure if this is sort of right with the vibe of thing. And eventually talking to the publisher's like, no, we're going to put this one in. I love this one. It's good. We're going to put it in. And it was the right decision, because there's been more feedback and response and reaction about that story than any other story in the book.
Wow.
And you just can't pick that. It's just one of those things. And then I got contacted by Pseudopod, which are a fantastic short fiction podcast, and they wanted to do a production of that story. And so, it's just sort of proves itself. But I was really on the fence about it. So it's really difficult to pick what, I love all my stories. That's why I wrote them. I think they're an idea we're exploring, but it's really other people that will sort of reveal how good they are or not. Like, because I've had other stories that I thought were just really good and I really loved them, and I couldn't wait for them to get out there, and then they got published and just sank like a stone. It's like, it happens with novels too. People just it just doesn't get the attention you think it would. But then another one that you put out thinking, oh, well, I wonder this might not get much notice, just goes gangbusters. So if we could actually pick that stuff, of course, we'd all be bestsellers.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And we'd also be mind readers.
Yeah,
which I'm not sure I want to be.
No, but it may be best not to. I would like to know that I could. I would like to be a bestseller, but I don't want to be a mind reader.
Yeah, no, I'll take the good aspects of mind reading, but I'd happily leave away the uncomfortable ones.
Okay.
Now, the concept of horror, I guess, conjures different things for different people, obviously. But so for yourself, when it comes to reading horror and supernatural thrillers, when you kick back just to enjoy a book, what elements or themes resonate with you most? For example, do you enjoy delving into stories of the origins and motivations of evil, or stories that talk about the actual battle between good and evil, or are you more the trials and tribulations that unfortunate characters can be faced with and the strengths that need to be found, or are you all about monsters and ghosts?
In answer to the question, yes. What it really comes down to for me is it's always the story. I'm always surprised, or not always surprised. I'm often surprised by things that I'm not sure that I'm going to like, that it turns out I love, and vice versa. Or, there are stories out there that everyone's raving about, and I read it and it's like, oh God, I don't get it. Why is everyone so excited about this story?
So you are game to try reading something, outside your comfort zone then?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try stuff all the time. But that's just sort of the nature of it all. Right? When it comes to horror, same with any genre. I really enjoy good story and good characters where something interesting is happening. I'm not with horror. I'm not interested particularly in just the gross out splatterpunk sort of torture porn type horror. For me, I'm a lot more interested in the sort of brooding dread and the supernatural and the occult and the strange and the weird, and that's where my writing falls more than anything else, and it's where my reading preferences are. But I will read anything, and if it's a good story, I'll enjoy it. So yeah, and a good story is entirely subjective. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what it is at the end of the day. A good story is a good story, whatever genre it's in. Yeah. Now, I'm a huge horror fan, and I've grown up with horror. I've read horror since I was a little kid. Probably like yourself, probably read a few things at a young age that I most likely shouldn't have.
Yes.
And the same when it comes to movies. And to this day, I'm a huge horror movie collector and lover. But, the writer and director and composer John Carpenter once spoke about his thoughts about the campfire of our distant ancestors, I guess, and how that he thought or liked to imagine that campfire was somewhat of a birthplace of horror. And his idea was that there was two aspects, and there was the mystery of what lay out there in the darkness that once the sun went down and or beyond the light of the fire, and then there was the mystery of the darkness that we can find within ourselves, which is coming to grips with the horror within, and that we sometimes have to face. So I'm curious, what scares you more? The monsters and terrors that our minds create, or human beings and the horrors that's beyond the light of the fire?
I don't know. It's a tricky one, isn't it? I like the sort of definition, if you like, that horror is knowing the monster's out in the dark, and terror is seeing the monster emerge into the light.
That's a real good one. I haven't heard that before.
I like that definition, sort of between horror and terror, because for me, I really enjoy that sort of deep, visceral emotion of the horror, of knowing that there are things in the dark. But I do like to then also see them exposed or confronted as well. So it's it's a tricky thing to know. I tend to like I really enjoy a big monster flick, and big action and spectacle, and a lot of what I write falls into that category as well to some degree. But I like stuff that has real good sort of character and emotional weight to it as well. I'm not interested in something that's sort of all spectacle. So I guess it's a case of finding that middle ground,
Yeah, definitely. Well, when it comes to finding middle ground or finding those elements of a good horror story that makes, well, any elements of a story that makes a story good. So not just a pure spectacle of gore or torch porn, as you mentioned. So we've probably got a lot of listeners out there that may not be familiar with the horror genre. They may not have, delved into reading a good scary book or for whatever reason. So I'm just wondering, if you were tasked with converting some of our listeners and book lovers out there to the horror genre, what would be your sales pitch to bring them over and discover all those wonders that can be found within literary nightmares and musings?
Well, I tend to find that a lot of the time when people hear horror, they think slasher movies. And I think that I always try to convince people that horror is such a broad church. There is so much variety and depth to be found in horror, and so many different angles to come at it from. And, slasher movies and that sort of stuff is just a tiny percentage of the horror that's out there.
Yeah, see, I myself would put any slasher in the category of thriller, because unless the antagonist is some sort of creature from hell or, possessed spirit or something supernatural. But if it's just someone on a killing spree, that's a thriller, I think. I mean, there's horror in it as far as it's terror. But
you're immediately into the great debate that happens again and again and again, that what is horror? And that's the thing for me as well, is that horror and comedy are two spices that just get added to the recipes of other genres, because you can have a science fiction movie and you can have a science fiction comedy or a science fiction horror. You can do the same with a love story, you can do the same with a thriller, you can do the same with anything. So horror itself is not particularly an entire genre, but horror is something that gets applied to other stories. And so if it is just a psycho killer on a killing spree, then yeah, it's a thriller, it's a horror thriller. If that killer has been brought about by some sort of supernatural or occult or paranormal method, then is it still a thriller, or does it become more horror, or is it a fantasy now, or is it a dark fantasy or whatever? So this is the big thing about trying to define any genre or trying to convince people one way or another. If people say, you know, oh, I don't like horror, I don't read horror, for me that's often a challenge to go, okay, well, read this and tell me what you think, and, you know, and give them something that might be completely left field of what they think horror might be.
Do you have any go-tos if you are in that, like off the top of your head? Do you have short stories or books that you know are a go-to if you did have to give somebody something left of field?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, usually one of my regular go-tos for convincing people that horror is not what they expect is Karen Warren, who's just an amazing Australian author. She's got a novel out called The Grief Hole, which is a horror novel, but it's not like anything people are likely to have read. And it's way far removed from any kind of slasher movie horror that they might be thinking of when they hear the term. And she's got a short story collection called Dead Sea Fruit that is an incredible, there's like 30 stories in it or something. There's an incredible cross-section of her short fiction work over the years. She's an absolute master. So she's one I frequently go to when people say, I don't really like horror. I go read Karen Warren. Then there's other people like Nathan Bollingrad or Laird Barron, or, you know, there's so many. There's a plethora of incredible authors out there writing really interesting things that are horror, but that are not what people who don't know horror would assume horror is.
Yeah. And I think a short story collection would be a great place to start for anyone who is looking to dip their toes in the scary world of horror, because whether it's 5 tales, 10 tales, 15 tales, or 20 tales in the volume, you can pretty much be guaranteed that it's not going to be the same idea rehashed on every story. So you're definitely going to find a whole, you know, spectrum of colors and themes and atmospheres.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's like, and it's good to know that about your own work as well. So, you know, a lot of the time people say, oh, you know, I've seen your name or whatever, or I'm at a convention or I'm at Supernova or something, and people come over and go, oh, where should I start? It's like, well, it really kind of depends on what you want. But for me, I've got, you know, there's my short story collection, Crowshine, that it's more dark fantasy and some horror. There's Served Cold, which is short stories that are horror short stories. I've got Devarin, Dark and Hidden City that are standalone novels. They'll give you, you know, a good idea of novel length work. There's the Alex Kane series, which is a trilogy if you want to binge a big thing. So you need to kind of sort of establish what sort of a reader they are, and then say, here, you know, try this, try this, try this. And that's another reason that novellas are good as well, because a novella sort of bridges that gap. It's longer than a short story. It's not such a commitment of time as a novel. But you can say, well, look, this is me, see if you like that.
And it sounds like you've got so many different options for readers coming to explore your work, or first-time readers.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Alan Baxter.
Been around a while. There's lots of entry points.
Yeah, which is a really, you know, that's an inspiring thing to work towards for myself and for anyone else out there that's writing. That's a really, really good position to be in, so that you can cater for any type of readership out there.
Yeah, I mean, the more work you produce, the more likely you are to pick up readers, because, you know, if they find one thing that they like, they'll look for other things. So if you've got more, if you write a book and you spend all the time in the world trying to promote this one book, you know, you might not catch the attention of too many people. But if you know, the best marketing is to write another book, because every time a new book comes out, you might catch new readers, and then they'll go and explore your backlist. So
yeah, definitely. Yep. So keep writing, everybody.
Yeah, always yeah. The first rule, the first and only rule.
Yes.
Keep writing.
Speaking of the writing process, I was wondering if we could have a quick chat about some practical matters. Obviously, you are a martial arts trainer, and so you're probably a very fit man, and you probably look after your health and your body. So, and I understand that, you know, you've raised. I've read a couple of times where you've raised the importance of moving on regular intervals when you're writing, because obviously sitting down is ultimately not very good for you if you're sitting down for long periods of time. And I also read that you, to help combat that, you actually use a timer. And so I'm wondering if you could give myself and our listeners out there a little bit of a insight into a typical Alan Baxter writing session. Yeah,
well, sure. Yeah. I mean, it varies depending on what I'm working on. Well, a day like today, for example, I got a bloody nail in my tyre last night and got a puncture.
Oh no.
So I had to stick the spare wheel on last night, and then so this morning I shot over to the tyre centre and had the puncture repaired, and then walked the dog, then come back and I'm chatting to you. I've got something else I've got to run out and do after this. So this is one of those days where I'm doing all sorts of bits and pieces, and I don't think too much about it because I'm just sort of up and down and running around. But on those times when I'm sort of locked in, especially on that first draft sort of period where I'm just sitting there and just focusing in on writing, that's the time where I can sit down in the chair and then sort of look up, and it's 3 hours later and I've hardly moved anything except my fingers. That's when it starts to get really unhealthy. So when I sit down to write in a solid session like that, especially first draft stuff, I put the timer on my phone on the desk and I set the timer for 30 seconds. For 30 minutes.
I was going to say that's some fast
30 seconds.
fiction.
I set the timer for 30 minutes, and then I'll just get on with writing. And when the timer goes, I'll either, if I'm really zoned in, I'll restart it. I'll only ever restart once. I'll never let it go past twice. But more often than not, when the timer goes, I'll just stand up out of the chair and I'll walk around in the room. I'll move around. I might just do some crunches and push-ups or something, and then sit back down again, start the timer and go again. And I can do it without really breaking flow because it's just like a few minutes out of the chair. Or if I'm in a place where I can take a little break, I might go and make a cup of tea or go and get a glass of water, go to the bathroom, whatever. Just something that gets me out of the chair, moving around before I sit back in the chair again. So that every 30 minutes, I move around one way or another, just for a few minutes at a time. Because otherwise it's entirely possible that I can sit in a chair for 6 or 7 hours through the day working and like get up once or twice in that whole time, which is just really unhealthy in so many different ways. But that little alarm going off every 30 minutes, and sometimes I might just be in a zone and I'll literally stand up, squat, bend my legs, bend over, sit back down and carry on. Like take 5 seconds out of the chair. But something that means I'm not just sitting in the same place the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely move around a lot rather than sitting for hours on end. And for me, I think it's also like obviously when you're in the zone, you're in the zone. But even then, just a 1-2 minute break, like you said, just making a cuppa, go check, what's happening outside, weather-wise, whatever it might be, just stretching. I think it's a bit of a refresh too for your mind. And sometimes you
right.
pop back down, it's like, oh, hang on. And, this whole new idea comes, even if it's mid-sentence, you might go, oh, I've got a better idea now. So, it's like refresh.
Yeah, it does. It definitely works that way. It's something that, I mean, just, like, I've got a very physical job as well. So a lot, in my other job. So a lot of people think that sort of accounts for things. And it's like, well, I'm going to go and teach a class tonight and I'm going to bust my ass for 2 hours. So it's okay if I sit around now, but it's not. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Like, it's good that you're going to bust your ass for 2 hours, and that will help you get fit and strong and whatever. But that doesn't negate the unhealthy aspects of sitting still all day before you do it. So you need to sort of break that up. So yeah, as you say, anything, and even literally just standing up. Sometimes if the alarm goes off, I'll literally stand up from my chair and I'll stand there typing. And just like bend my knees up and down a little bit while I'm doing it, and then sit down again if I'm really locked in. It's just something to make your body move and the blood move,
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent advice. And ultimately, too, if you are in a zone, the more stretching and breaks that you apply, possibly the longer you can actually extend your writing session because you're keeping that blood flow, as opposed to, realizing your legs have gone dead and, your arms aching, your neck's starting to seize up. So yeah, definitely excellent advice. Alan, I understand you wrote a book called The Martial Art of Writing, essays on the discipline of writing filtered through decades of experience as a horror writer and martial arts expert. I'm wondering, do you have a quick couple of gems from within that publication that you might want to share with our listeners when it comes to the overall challenges of writing?
Yeah, this was an interesting thing, actually. I've been sort of toying with the idea of doing something like this for a while, and then Brainjar Press actually approached me and asked if I'd wanted to contribute to they're talking about their series of writer chat books, where they're doing these short books, I think one a month or one every 2 months from a different author with all sorts of writing advice, and each one is being released as a chat book, and mine comes out next month, which is this one. And it's basically just sort of collected essays all sorts of stuff that I've written over the last probably 10 years or so, of writing advice and observations and whatever, and most of it through the lens of being a martial artist. Because for me, the discipline of training hard and frequently and getting good at Kung Fu in my case, or martial arts in general, is very much the same as the discipline required to write regularly and develop your craft and get good at writing. So I very much, they're both artistic disciplines, and they both require the same kind of dedication and focus and bloody mindedness and determination and everything else. So so for me, that's always been a thing. There is an essay in there about moving your body around and being fit while you're writing. There's one in there. I've got a sort of long form essay in there that's based on my writing fight scenes workshop, to give people some good tips about writing good fight scenes. There's stuff in there about just knuckling down and doing the hard work and how you can stay motivated to do it and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully there's some value in there for people. It comes out actually in like 2 weeks, I think. So.
And I'm curious, what in your opinion makes a bad fight scene in a book?
That's a bigger question than you might realise.
What's the first thing that makes you cringe?
Yeah, well, the first thing is that when a fight scene should be fast and intense and visceral and emotionally powerful and all that stuff. But so often people write fight scenes where they try to write too much detail and too much description, and it's all slow and misses the sort of essence of what fighting should feel like. So that's always a problem. And more often than not, their experience of fighting is what they've seen in the movies, and a lot of the time people will write a book and then they'll effectively transcribe a movie fight scene into a written narrative, and it just doesn't work, and it's really kind of obvious when there's so much more available to us as writers. So a lot of what my workshop's about is that stuff, what you can do as a writer that is so much better than just pretending, just copying down a fight scene from a movie.
Yeah, unfortunately, those fight scenes in movies are more ballet than they are fighting. And having done my time as a bit of a gypsy in different bars, across the East Coast and Gold Coast and different areas, seen many a fight in the good old whiskey bar. And usually they're exactly as you mentioned before. They're very quick, very filled with emotion. And it's usually over in a few seconds, really. Very rarely you've got somebody going toe-to-toe for 5 minutes and showing off their moves. It's usually one person has the upper hand at some point within a couple of seconds, and it's violent and it's over. Yeah,
exactly right. I mean, I've mentioned that before to people as well, that if a fight does last more than a few seconds, you're probably in big trouble. That's part of it. And it's just that, I mean, for most people, their experience of fighting is movies, and that's good. Because
that is good.
It's good that if most people's experience of fighting doesn't really exist for real, that's better for them. But equally, with this whole, the whole sort of write what you know principle, you might not know what you're writing, but you do need to know about what you're writing, so you do a good, authentic job of it. So that's where this sort of workshops and these essays and things come from. So.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend people go out and get their Jaws wallet just so that to be able to authentically describe that sensation of your lips splitting across the bottom of your teeth. So definitely use your imagination there.
Yeah, I recommend that people train martial arts, because you get to train and you get to spar and stuff, and that should hopefully give you a bit of an idea of some stuff that helps. But I definitely don't advise going out and getting in fights to learn about fighting.
No. And what happens if you hurt your fingers? How are you going to finish that story? That's
right. You will almost certainly break your hand if you land a good punch.
Yeah. I don't want to hear anybody out there say, well, what about voice to text? Because no. That's an evil idea, I think. But then again, who knows? It may be the future. So, but yeah. Now, when it comes to your career, one thing that definitely strikes out is, your willingness to take on all forms of publishing. So you've been self-published, you've been traditionally published, you've done short stories, blogs, audio forms of your short stories have been produced. Literally, it seems you've covered just about everything. So just wondering, what are your thoughts on the industry that is writing, and how do you see it transforming as we move into 2021? And are there any elements that you prefer over other, like any styles of publishing that you think you're going to lean more towards than others?
It's a good question. The truth is that publishing constantly changing and evolving. It spent a long time sort of very statically held in the old legacy model, but then from the turn of the century on, it's been rapidly moving and evolving. Ebooks, print on demand, audio books, podcasts, all that sort of stuff. And really, if you to make a living at this, you need multiple income streams. If you can land that sort of novel deal with a legacy publisher, like Pan Macmillan or Random House or something like that, and you get a good advance and you get good sales, and they take your next book and you start to make a living out of it, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
But that is a very small percentage of people who land that lucky. What's what it comes down to, because there's thousands of great writers out there and thousands of great manuscripts that don't find readers. So if you do happen to land a good deal and a good audience out of the gate and you do well, then fantastic, more power to you. But it's a very small percentage of people that do that. For most of us, we're effectively sort of the new mid-list, which means that you have to make a good living, you have to produce a lot and you have to diversify. And I've had publishers go down and take books down with them. So if all your books are with one publisher and they collapse, and you're in big trouble. So I've really sort of embraced the hybrid author concept. So I've got the Alex Kane series published by HarperCollins here in Australia, and then it's published by Griffinwood Press elsewhere in the world, and they've also carried a couple of my other books. I've got stuff with Grey Matter Press, PS Publishing, Ticonderoga Publications here in Australia, sort of all various size indie press or small press. And then back in the day, I sort of messed around a bit with self-publishing, quickly realized it was a lot of work and I wanted to focus on writing. But these days, as things are becoming more streamlined, I've just been sort of experimenting with self-publishing again, partly purely for the fun of it, but also partly because at least there's going to be a few things that I control completely that way. And I've got a sort of a readership and a fan base now that means that self-publishing is a bit more effective, than it might be before you have an established audience. So, there's lots of factors to bear in mind, but I think that the hybrid author concept is a good one because, there's more options. So, what if you can get in well with good publishers, that's great. If you can self-publish some stuff, that's great. If you write short fiction, then you can sell it in the first instance to magazines or anthologies. You can sell reprints to podcasts. You can potentially get paid for it again if someone publishes a short story collection, or if you self-publish a collection at some point after selling stories, you can sort of remonetize them that way as well. And so it's all about finding as many ways to make a living at this gig as you can. And all of these methods are fundamentally finding ways to reach new readers, because that's what it really comes down to. Regardless of making a living, what we all need is a wide and engaged readership. We need lots of people who like our work, who are keen to read whatever we put out, and that's how you sort of build and maintain a career. So yeah, for me, I'm always on the lookout for what opportunities are around there, and I will always sort of aim high with the bigger publishers first. I'll always prefer that a good publisher with a good marketing department and an art department to make good covers and stuff. I'd always rather work with them first, because then I can just concentrate on the process of writing. But it's a constantly evolving and changing world, so we never know for sure from 1 minute to the next what might happen next.
No, you're right. And I mean, obviously, we were talking a little bit about music before we started recording, and I like to think of it a little bit similar to, if you are a musician or in a band, because, yeah, it would be fantastic, although, even there, the landscape's changing a lot, but it would be fantastic to get a record deal and have everything, have a beautiful, album polished and recorded and put out there and big tours. Absolutely, that's the goal. And same thing for writers, to have one of our stories resonate with a big publisher and be involved in that process. However, for any band out there, there's also the idea of you need fans, and whether it's that back room, in a dusty old bar, you just play everywhere you can. Like, you just play, because the whole idea is to get your music out there.
You sell merch, you sell CDs, streams.
That's right. Yeah,
you do online stuff. It's the same for everybody these days. In the creative world, we have to be adaptable as much as we can.
Yeah, and ultimately we are our own managers now, to a certain degree.
You've got, even when you're with the big press now, you still have to do a lot of self-promo. There's a handful of authors out there with a name and a readership that's that engaged that they can just drop a book and it does well and they don't have to worry about it. But they are, the tiny, tiny, tiny 0.0 whatever percent of top end authors. The vast majority of authors, even big name people, are out there doing a lot of promo. They're doing signing tours, they're doing conventions, they're online or anything else. That's how the job works.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a huge adventure. So every day's a learning, every day's an adventure. If you love that adventure, then it's this, although it's a challenge, of course, it's a big mountain to climb, but if the journey is fun, then ultimately there's no rush to get to the top. It's the journey's what it's all about.
Yeah, it's important to do as much as you can, but only as much as you sort of feel comfortable doing. And you've just got to remember that apart from anything else, the writing always comes first. So you've always got to be prioritizing the writing and making sure you're working on what you want to work on, and then everything you can do to promote that you're happy to do, then sure, you should do it, and then make sure the writing's not suffering, and just keep working at it. It really is a marathon. There's no sprint involved. It's about constantly working hard and working smart.
That's right. Or like it's one of Stephen King's short stories. It's a long walk. Don't ever slow down to a point where you stop.
That's it.
Keep moving. Now, for a bit of fun stuff. Look, all of your book covers are really striking. They're very vibrant, and you've got so many different images and so many different color schemes, but they do sort of manage to come together like as a collective still. But the one I'm most interested in, and I'm pretty sure you've got a good idea what I'm going to say next, is of course the Roo. And I understand I've come across many big Roos in the outback, and I was filled with lots of terror stories when I did some opal mining out in Anamuka, which is as remote as you can get. And I was told, when you're exploring, abandoned mines, just be careful, because if you do spook a kangaroo down there where they go to cool down, if they're in a position where there's a dead end, they will attack you and slice you to shreds. So that cover was definitely, jumped out at me. But I understand, was it inspired by an artist's sketch? Like which came first, the story or the sketch?
Well, what came first actually was a news article. I can't even remember which particular publication it was in. I was on Twitter, and there was a bunch of American reviewers and authors on Twitter chatting to each other and laughing about this news article they found about a big red that had started harassing people in this small town, and it was turning up and digging up their gardens and sort of monstering people. They were laughing and joking about it, and then I got involved, and I was like, it's pretty funny, but it's actually real. And like you've just said, I've faced up to some big reds sometimes, and they're fucking terrifying. They've
Absolutely
got huge clawed feet, and they're kind of aggro if you catch them at the wrong point, and they'll grab your dog and drown it in a dam if they get a chance, if the dog chases them and stuff like that.
They're basically bone and muscle, some of those big ones.
Yeah. I mean, they look like bodybuilders sometimes.
Yeah.
And so all this sort of conversation was happening on Twitter, and a bit of a joke. And then Keelan Patrick Burke, who's a fantastic author in his own right, he's a brilliant horror author, but he's also a great cover designer. That's the sort of a side gig that he does. He does great cover design. And so just for a laugh, he mocked up what was effectively like one of the old Zebra horror paperbacks from the 80s. Called The Roo, with this giant demonic Roo on the front cover. And he sort of just threw that up on Twitter for a laugh. It wasn't a very polished cover. It was just kind of like this concept idea. And everybody started saying, oh my God, that's ridiculous. That cover's too good. It should be a book. You can't waste a cover like that. Somebody should write the book. And then because I was the token Australian in the conversation, among all these American and British reviewers and authors, they all started hassling the hell out of me. You got to write this story. You got to write this story. And I started getting a couple of private messages as well saying, no, seriously, you reckon you can do it? This would be fantastic. So I contacted Keelan and I said, hey, can I have that cover? And he said, well, no, because it's not good enough, but I'll do a polished version. And if you write the book, yes, you can have the cover. And so I effectively wrote the story to go with the cover, and so that book became The Roo. I had an idea in mind for a short story in the outback that I've been playing with for a while that sort of involved a monster, and I hadn't really decided quite how I was going to develop that monster yet. And so then I just thought, well, I've got this story idea, and here's this giant kangaroo, so let's go. And that's what I did. And ridiculously, it's been probably one of, if not my actual most successful book to date. It's just gone bananas. It's been so popular.
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, A, that's such a super cool story, how it all came together. And B, you know exactly, to a certain degree, you know what you're going to get when you get that book. It's about a big killer kangaroo. And,
yeah,
and
that's exactly what it says on the tin.
Yeah. And I'm assuming you have really good sales overseas, because I'm sure it'll be a fascinating topic for a lot of people who already assume that all of our wildlife's out to kill us here, which is, well, a couple do, but most don't. But I've actually, having a look at the Roo, and I mean, obviously we had Razorback back in the 80s. That was a movie though, so that would kill a boar. Now you've brought to life the killer Roo. So, and I was thinking, a good sequel for you would be a gang of giant killer wombats.
Well, it's interesting that when the Roo happened and it sort of got pretty popular, a lot of people started talking about it should be a whole series. And Keelan said, all right, I'll do a few more covers. I'm not going to spend all this time doing a lot more. He said, but if authors contact me with a creature, I'll give them a cover as long as they donate any profits from the books to animal welfare charities of their choice.
Oh, that's awesome of him.
Yeah, and so we've subsequently had there's one about a possum, there's one about the cassowary.
Yeah, they're dangerous, the cassowary.
Yeah, and Max Booth, I think, is writing one called The Dillo about an armadillo, like a killer armadillo.
Okay.
Yeah, and so there's been a little handful of these kind of ridiculous monster creature features that have come about as a result of the Roo. And people keep hassling me to write a sequel to it, and I might do at some point, but I don't have plans to right now.
No, keep it in your back pocket.
But yes, the wombats are one thing that's cropped up. There's already been at least one or two drop bears books that have come out. So,
yeah, so we've got one Soul Survivor with a killer koala on the cover on the website.
Yes,
vicious looking cover. That's
Zach Ashford, I think, did that one. So there is this mini sort of subgenre going.
Yeah, that's amazing. See, in my head, I'm thinking, oh yeah, these evil wombats that build these, a catacomb maze under a town so that they can slowly eat everybody one by one, and you get dragged down into this evil lair.
All goes up into people's houses from underneath.
Yeah, that's it. Now, a quick couple of more questions, and I'll let you get on to your day. But I was just wondering, when it comes to, when you're putting together your tales, do you ever self-censor? Do you ever think, oh, I can't write that, or I can't put that in, or do you not?
No, definitely not. Especially with horror. That's the thing about horror, is that, you start down the dark alley and you keep going to the end. There are certain things that I won't write about if I don't think they're my story to tell. But there's not any subject matter that's that I would censor on if I did decide to go with it. I tend to sort of follow through. With the Alex Kane series, with the first book in that, with Bound, there was a scene, or there is a scene in that book that I was fairly sure that the publisher was going to balk at and ask me to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I was prepared to go to bat on that, and I wasn't sure quite how far I was going to go. And as it turned out, they didn't even bat an eye. And me and my agent were both a little surprised, but quite pleased that was the case. But yeah, I don't self-censor. But then equally, I never sort of put in anything that's just there for shock or spectacle. Everything in there is serving a story. So
mm-hmm.
Hopefully that's recognised by editors and readers as such. And especially if it's horror, people expect things to be confronting in one way or another. That's what we explore in horror. So
yeah, there's no such thing as G-rated horror.
No, that's it. I mean, there's sort of, there is kind of kids horror that is sort of in its own way, like an introduction to the concept. But once you're in that, when you're in the sort of the realm of adult horror, then there's nothing off limits.
Yeah,
equally,
rules are out the window.
Yeah, exactly. But equally, you absolutely have to be prepared to cop the consequences of anything you do, right? If you do fuck it up, or if you do something offensive or whatever, then you need to own that. You need to recognize that, and it's important to do the right research and understand what you're writing about. But yeah, no, I certainly don't self-censor.
No, yeah, it was a question that came to mind because I know sometimes whether it be like describing a particular visual when I'm writing, or sometimes it's even saying a particular phrase that a character might say. I have sort of bitten my tongue, going, "Oh, I don't know, is that a bit too much, or is that a bit too offensive?" But I usually come to the same conclusion, and that it is similar, I guess, to yourself, and that is, but it's vital to the story. I didn't just go, "Oh, let's put some gory piece in here" or something like that. And so I usually keep, there's nothing I haven't put in, but there's a couple of times where I have thought, "Oh, will I be turning off writers?" But I think you've got to be true to yourself. If the ideas come out and if it is part of the story, then take that chance.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah.
it in if it has its place.
And if it's correct for the character and all that sort of stuff, the same as any other part of writing would be, then yeah, then it belongs there. And sometimes you might have to have a conversation with an editor, and sometimes you might need to make some compromises or whatever, and you have to trust them to know the audience that they're selling to. But more often than not, authentic work stays true. So.
I like that. Authentic work will always shine through, and and of course you are right as well in the sense of once you understand, if you're successful and in a position where you've got that luxury of understanding your audience, then you already know how to dance with them. So there's going to be less chance, I'm guessing, of there's no need to second guess yourself because you already know that your audience loves what you're doing.
That's it. And then you get to the point where hopefully people, like in my case, hopefully people buy my stuff because they want to buy an Alan Baxter book. So they should know by now what they're getting.
Well, I entice everybody to jump into our horror genre on the website where you'll find a whole heap of your books, but definitely look up The Roo. I suspect this one will capture a lot of people's imagination and attention. Definitely.
I mean, a good introduction to what I do. The latest two books, The Roo and The Gulp, will give you a really good cross-section of what I do.
Excellent. And I've actually had a bit of a sneak preview of The Gulp and loved the idea of the canopy of trees and driving into that, strange town at twilight. And it's funny, isn't it? Because here in Australia, it's very easy to those isolated towns can carry such a haunting imagery, and it's such fertile ground for scary situations, scary characters.
Australia is just perfect for the isolated country town, and in this case with the Gulf, with the isolated harbour town, it's just perfect. And so I'm surprised it took me this long to get around to it, to be honest. But I'm glad I did.
But but the irony is, for myself, having travelled so much of this country up and down, I haven't done the western side, but the eastern side all the way up to the top and back down and into the deserts and mining towns. Bar maybe one funny odd town. Otherwise, every single town, even if it looks sketchy going into at night or whatever, it's always friendly. I think it's just so funny how I love the idea of a creepy country town, especially in Australia. But the reality is opposite. They're more likely to shout your beer, make you a cuppa, and help you out any way you can. So I thought that was funny.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story, right?
Yes, exactly. All right, Alan, one final question, and this is a very important question, something that I'm hoping you'll draw on all your experience and expertise to answer.
Okay.
Who wins between Bruce Lee and Jet Li in a theoretical battle?
Oh, wow. Jet Li's still alive and Bruce Lee's dead, so definitely Jet Li.
Yeah, but...
But you're not going to let me off.
Well, maybe I'll rephrase it. Zombie Bruce Lee and Jet Li. No.
You know what? It's an interesting concept, and I often people get upset when I say this. Bruce Lee was an incredible innovator, and incredibly important in the development of interest in martial arts and kung fu in the West. And he was an incredibly fast practitioner. His speed was phenomenal, but in terms of actual technique, he wasn't especially fantastic. he was very good and he was very fast. But equally, I've never seen Jet Li actually fight. So his form, his technique is brilliant, like way better than Bruce Lee. Whether he can actually apply and deploy that in a fight is questionable, because I've never seen him fight beyond incredibly highly choreographed things, whereas there is more record of Bruce Lee facing challenges. So it's an interesting question, and it's a difficult one to answer. At their peak, it's a matter of whether Jet Li's technique could outplay Bruce Lee's speed. That's what it would come down to.
Yes. Well, I guess something for us to ponder, because like I said, it may not have a clear-cut answer. But both brilliant to watch. And like I said, Bruce Lee was fantastic, so charismatic in his ability to bring interest to the discipline. And
both amazing. And one of my favourite movies of all, I was going to say favourite kung fu movies, but favourite movies of all time is Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. It's just an absolute fucking classic. So
what about Kiss of the Dragon with Jet Li?
Yeah, also fantastic, but Enter the Dragon stands head and shoulders for me in terms of just perfect kung fu movies. It's just, I love it, everything about it, the 70s sort of vibe, the setting, all the characters. It's just tremendous.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it. That's got John Saxon in it as well, hasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, that's the one. Yes. I've got a copy here. I might have to put it on again one night. Old VHS copy, because I do love my old VHS. But nonetheless, Mr. Alan Baxter, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, and thank you so much for being a part of the Australian Book Lovers podcast, and for listing some of your amazing titles on our website. It is an honour to have had the opportunity to talk with you, and look, I really look forward to keeping an eye and see. Just discovering some of your books, but seeing what you've got coming out later in the year. And, obviously your career is just going up and up and up. So definitely an inspiration. And you've raised some brilliant points for writers out there, potential writers. And look, just thank you so much for your time today, and all the best for yourself and your family moving forward.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Excellent. You take care.
Cheers.
What a fantastic interview. He is a man with many things to say, and juggling many things in his life. But what I was impressed with, it feels like he's kind of driven to write, and, he's obligated maybe to deliver to his readers, to his audience, to himself, really, to get his work out there. And I've read Alan's Alex Kane series, which starts with Bound, which was fantastic. Picked that up at Speculate, which was Victoria's, or Melbourne's, first speculative fiction festival. This was all pre-COVID, of course. And I listened to Alan present. I can't actually remember what he was presenting, but I remember thinking, that's pretty useful as a writer, because he was talking about some of the practical things about writing. So that was good. Nice one. Short stories. I did like the fact that he talks about horror is knowing the monster in the dark, and terror is seeing them come out in the light. Wow, that's pretty good.
Yes, absolutely. I would add to that, horror is knowing or not knowing the monster.
Well, that's true. Yeah. The unknown, that fear, for sure. Yeah. And, diversify and doing the hybrid writing and destroying all the stereotypes. So that's some of the notes that I took. So, yeah, like it.
Oh, look, all of the things he does with the writing, there's one thing that is, more than obvious, and that is he enjoys it. And isn't that the number one, most important ingredient in just about anything you do in life? Is there has to be a sense of enjoyment. Otherwise, what is the point? So.
Absolutely.
But it was good. It was, it was fun having a chat about the martial arts and fighting in movies and books versus in real life. But, it was also, it was fun having a little bit of chat with him about my meeting of a martial arts expert who is now an international martial arts judge. I'm not sure if I've told the story before, but when I was working over in China and we got to sit down with a very renowned over there martial arts trainer who runs all different dojos, and he was actually worked with Jet Li to help choreograph for all his movies and stuff. And he didn't speak English, so we were going through a translator. And so thinking back to, when I was talking about the psychology and saying, oh, we were talking about serial killers and whatnot in Queensland and everything. I'm not saying he's a serial killer, of course, but I was about to say no to some food that he was being offered because we were in a restaurant in a small village in the mountains in China, and they'd shut down the restaurant, so it was just for us because of how important this guy was. And the food was some of it was delicious, some of it I just didn't know what it was. So I thought, you know what, I'm not going to eat that because getting sick out here is going to not be good for me. So I was about to just say no because this martial arts man was extending a plate because it was like a banquet. Anyway, my friend asked him, hey, through the interpreter, have you ever hurt anybody, by accident or anything when you fight?
Mm-hmm.
And he said something over his shoulder to the translator and then was smiling at me with his plate. And the translator said to my friend, oh, my master is very sorry. He has killed 2 people in combat.
Oh!
And I looked at it. That was delicious. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'll be happy to take that from.
So that was fun. So so he was an interesting character. He's a martial arts expert, now international judge. Obviously, not through intent, but had killed people in combat. So obviously, it was pretty serious over there in China. And he loved Snoopy. So in his car, he had Snoopy little dangly thing from the rearview mirror. He had a Snoopy steering wheel cover. I'm like, oh wow! And we asked him what was his favourite weapon. I can't remember if I mentioned this in the interview. And he touched his T-shirt and said, my shirt. And I asked, huh? And he said, if you've got a gun, with this shirt, I take your gun. If you've got a knife, with this shirt, I take your knife. So I thought, there you go. This guy's the real deal. But nonetheless, so there you go. Lamingtons, killers, foods, and Snoopy. How can you not be inspired to read horror now?
Well, yes. Well, okay. I'm going to suggest we jump into the quotes because thinking about you and Alan talking about, I guess, censoring your own writing or just putting it all out there. And a quote that reminded me of a quote, interestingly, by T.S. Eliot. Now, people, may know that T.S. Eliot is Thomas Stearns Eliot, and he was a poet and essayist, a publisher and a playwright. And lots of people will know about Cats. The musical Cats is, of course, based on Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, which is a collection of poems that he wrote. But this quote from T.S. Eliot is, only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go.
Yes, beautiful words to be said. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, how can you know your limits unless you try and push past them?
Yes, unless you jump out there, unless you finish that book, unless you put stuff out there. And, Alan talking about he and his editor wondering whether the publisher would say no to a particular section that he'd put in a book, and they didn't even blink at that. So that was good. He put it out there.
Yeah, it reminds me of, he's kind of a fitness guru now. I think he's a Navy SEAL, but a gentleman by the name of David Goggins, who is just, I suspect he's not all there because he just pushes himself to the absolute limits. He just, pushes his body through, just to test his own limits constantly. Mm-hmm. He decides, okay, I want to learn how to run marathons, and he just starts with like the biggest marathons on the planet and just does it until he collapses. But his theory is, he said he developed his system by when his body and mind could not take any more. It was absolutely done, spent, nothing left, all gone. His theory is that's when you're at 80%.
Ah, right.
And that's how he said by incorporating that philosophy, he's found that the limits he previously set upon himself, whether it be mentally or physically, could be shattered because you've got to look beyond what you think is the limit. Yeah. If you move assuming the limit, then you'll reach the limit, which I think is basically what that quote is saying, isn't it? Like you need to be able to push
absolutely.
past that limit. Yeah.
Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
All right, hit me with your first quote.
Okay, so my first quote is from Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right.
And I guess this loops back to a little bit about what Alan mentioned about knowing the monster in the dark. So the quote is, when a resolute young fellow steps up to the great bully, the world, and takes him boldly by the beard, he is often surprised to find it comes off in his hand and that it was only tied on to scare away the timid adventurers. So yes, face your fears. And, if you stand up to it, maybe it's not as scary as you thought. And I think that's what, also comes with stepping out of the comfort zone. I suppose ripping off the Band-Aid, or grab it, and if it scares you, grab it with both hands. You may discover it turns into a puppy dog. or a cute little kitten, and you go, oh wow. And if it does, imagine how powerful you'll feel moving forward in life if you realize that you can turn a lot of fears into puppy dogs and kittens.
Yes.
I want to go hunt puppy dogs and kittens now. Turn all monsters into kittens.
Perhaps you better go and read old Possum's T.S. Eliot's work on cats, and chat to your lovely cat there, and because cats is about the psychology, of course, and philosophy of cats. So,
Well, he's asleep at the moment, so I've worked out his psychology. It's sleeping, don't annoy me, and if it's awake, where are my cookies? That's about it.
All right. So my second quote is kind of, I guess, at the other end of the spectrum from the discipline and the drive that somebody like Alan has, and in achieving all the things and juggling all the things that he does in his life. So this is from Elizabeth Gilbert. She's an American journalist and author, and I've read a couple of her books. Eat, Pray, Love, people might remember, was turned into a movie as well, and Big Magic, which is about creative living, and that's something that I embrace as often as I can. But Elizabeth's quote is, "Embrace the glorious mess that you are."
Oh, I'm embracing hard, because it is a glorious mess.
I love that. Embrace the glorious mess that you are. Just take it all in. And it's something that, when I'm working with people in coaching and leadership and those kind of things, is that everything you are, every decision that you make, every mistake that you've done, every fantastic thing that you've achieved, it's all you. And the glorious mess is so much to draw from then creatively, and there's so much potential, and there's so much strength in what you can achieve. And just embrace it.
Well, I might run with that, Veronica, because I might incorporate your first quote with the second. So I might push my glorious mess to its absolute limits and beyond. See how glorious this mess can really become.
That's it. Go for it.
No, but yeah, absolutely right. You got to love every part of yourself, mistakes included, or messes included. And hey, the best meal in the world's you can't cook a beautiful meal in a kitchen without you're gonna have to do dishes at some point. And the only way you can be doing, you might as well make sure that the meal's good, because the mess is always there.
Yeah,
as long as out of it, as long as something good comes out of it at some point.
Yeah, and how many fantastic inventions and ideas and works and changes in people's lives have come from mistakes, and the one that instantly springs to mind, of course, is Post-it notes. The glue wasn't strong enough to hold whatever, but it was perfect for that, rip off and put things back that Post-it notes have. So, yeah.
Yes, it wasn't there. Now I'll have to remember my science history correctly, but the background radiation readings were discovered by an antenna, because at first they thought there was an issue with pigeon poop, affecting the signal when they were trying to detect. They were trying to detect something else, but they stumbled upon this background frequency, which turned out to be the background microwave radiation, which of course allowed us to then start beginning to calculate the age of the universe, all from an antenna and a bit of bird poo.
Yeah.
You never know where the ingredients are going to take you.
Never know. That glorious mess that is, a human life.
Yeah, yes. A bit of poop, and we end up delving into the mind of God and the universe. So my next quote is from Bertrand Russell.
Right.
And this quote reads as follows: "Fear is the main source of superstition and one of the main sources of cruelty. To conquer fear is the beginning of wisdom." So I like that. Conquer fear, it's beginning of wisdom, because I think, I wonder how many people do strike out, and look, the thing that quote gave me a little bit of reflection upon is, a lot of strength that we see in the world, and strength used for the wrong reasons. And that can be, and power. So it can be, for example, military strength or political strength or physical strength, which is essentially usually equal to power as well. A lot of that, the bad stuff that comes from those positions, are actually out of fear. So fear doesn't always, I don't think, present itself as easy. It doesn't fit into just a simple pigeonhole. Some of the most confident people may have, be
struggling with a great fear themselves. And so, but if we can conquer the fear, obviously, as that quote says, maybe that's the beginning of wisdom, because we can understand where we need to find an inner strength. And it also means pulling that beard off and not being scared of seeing what the real, pulling behind the curtain. But if you're scared, if you're in, say, for example, a position of power and you're scared, you may strike out, and rather than try and harness the fear and go on that, I guess, journey of wisdom, you strike out and you become a creator of fear, which is unfortunately all too obvious to see in the world. But maybe if anything I can try and do today after this podcast is try and face my own fears a little bit better after such a fun time talking with such an amazing author and having an opportunity to talk all things horror.
Very good.
Because that's it. That's I think the magic of horror at the end of the day is not all, but ultimately it's about making it through to the other side.
Yes.
It's about surviving. It's about facing things that we don't want to face, and often having to do things we never thought we'd be capable of doing to get to the other side, to survive. And so a good horror story for me is one that takes you on that journey, shows you, to use some of your quotes, shows the characters, puts them in a position where they have no choice but to look beyond their own limitations. If they really want to live, if they really want to survive, if they want to make right, if they want to battle evil. And by doing that, they discover the boundaries or the limitations they thought existed aren't there. They can do so much more.
They can exceed.
And
absolutely.
that is how evil is going to defeat, good is going to defeat evil. And isn't that what life's all about?
Defeating evil, most definitely.
Yes. So not evil defeating good.
All right, it's very good, and I hope that everybody has thoroughly enjoyed this episode. Lots of bits and pieces, where to find free books, where to help authors, how to cope with horror, how to think about horror slightly differently, lots of different things. And if you want to hear more, you can, of course, listen to the rest of our podcasts, which are on all good podcasting platforms. If you want to follow us on social media, we are on Twitter at Australian Books, Facebook and Instagram at Australian Book Lovers. And please feel free to join up and subscribe to our newsletter. It's not a regular one. It's only when we have lots of great stuff to share, which includes giveaways, updates, new books, and special features. So jump on there to the australianbooklovers.com and you'll have a look and you can see full book lovers. And on that page, you can jump in and subscribe.
Yes, indeed.
All
so
right.
I was just thinking, Veronica. So last episode, or actually, yes, the last time we had a chance to do a tagline, because obviously that was episode number 21.
Yes.
We went for the cinematic movie trailer style. So I'm thinking in celebration of our horror podcast edition today with Alan Baxter, would you like to maybe try doing a heavy whisper, and I'll put some spooky horror sound effects and see if we can make this a horror one.
Sounds good. I thought you were going to say to me, scream like, I was being murdered. Read my Rosie books!
No, because that's it. I'll just get the murder birds to do that. I'll just download the murder birds.
So we're going for a horrified whisper as we, the stage whisper. All right. Okay. So, book lovers, don't forget to... Aussie books.
Okay, I can't promise how that's going to turn out either, listeners, but we'll see. We'll try anyway. But thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you for being a part of our Australian Book Lovers podcast, episode number 24, the lucky number for me, and we hope you'll join us for the very next episode. But in the meantime, take care.
Bye for now.
Let's meet again when magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.